okay, let's say you actually want to buy an online business on one of those marketplaces like Flippa or Acquire.com or Empire Flipper. There's a bunch of places where you can buy small businesses and actually get into the game of buying and building businesses. So what are the tips and tricks that I can share with you, having just acquired quite a few Shopify stores specifically? So number one is always use an escrow account. Many of those marketplaces anyway provide one, but I would even set up your own escrow account because it's a bit cheaper and you don't have to pay extra fees. But definitely use it because it always hedges you if the deal falls through. You just make sure that the money you might have transferred, right? You could always check that all the clauses in the contract that you've signed are fulfilled before the money actually gets wired to the seller. So it's definitely worth it for the small fee that you have to pay for that. Then typically it's much easier to buy the assets of the store and not the legal entity behind it. So an asset purchase agreement, so-called. You're just going to avoid a bunch of issues, right? So what that just means is that you just buy the Shopify store itself, not the legal entity behind it, right? And with that, you can avoid all kinds of tax, legal issues, have to do way less due diligence, and generally it's a much cleaner way to do those deals. And again, relatively standard practice. So that's the contract that I would really work with to make your first acquisition. Then don't forget really all the store assets in the contract, right? So again, the Shopify store itself is obvious, but don't forget all the marketing channels, all the creatives that the store has produced since ever, all the domain names, every contract that they might have had with a supplier or with a freelancer or with a content creator. So just make sure you include everything and put it in the contract, because that way, if you forget to transfer something, you can always go back and contractually demand to get that asset later. And that happens actually pretty often. Don't forget a non-compete clause. You obviously don't want the seller to sell you the store and then compete and then just like pop up with the exact same or very similar store and having known exactly the product that you now own and everything around it, right? So make sure you add that. Usually 2 to 3 years is enough to put in, but that's also a negotiation thing. And then finally, if you do a profit share, make sure you very clearly define what the profit is, because everyone has their own costs that include or exclude. Ideally, you just do a revenue share, to be honest, but if you already do a profit share, then just make sure you define it very clearly so that all parties are on the exact same page. And those are really the top 5 tricks that I've learned when making my acquisition. Hopefully you will find helpful if you decide to make your first acquisition.